Hi, I'm Martha Baden, librarian at Prescott Public Library in Prescott, Arizona. Our library was selected to host the Smithsonian exhibit, Voices and Votes, Democracy in America. Due to the global pandemic, we have had to close the library temporarily, but we didn't want you to miss this exciting opportunity. Let's go on inside and our docents will give you a tour. Voices and Votes, Democracy in America is a Museum on Main Street exhibition developed by the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service. Based on an exhibition by the National Museum of American History, funded by the United States Congress, brought to you by Arizona Humanities. We're here in the Founders Suite at the library and about to check out the exhibit behind me. Before we begin, I want to ask you to think about the images, the people, and the historic events that come to mind when you think about Voices and Votes. Take a moment, share with the people around you, or you can post a comment on this video, or use the hashtag #VoicesVotes and become part of a national conversation. Your docents today are librarians and community members who are passionate about our history and civic engagement. We hope that you will enjoy this tour, learn something new, and be challenged to think deeply about Voices and Votes, Democracy in America, the history and the future.
More than just waging a war of independence, the American revolutionaries were actually embarking on a true leap of faith. They were inventing a government, a shockingly new government, which was dependent on the sovereignty of the people. That means that the power of the nation was not in the hands of the monarchy or the aristocracy, but rather in the citizens themselves. And that is a shockingly radical idea. Hi, I'm Russ Miller. I'd like to take you through the first part of this exhibit, which basically deals with the acts of the resistance as it led to our nation. So come on. I'd like to point up this picture as an example. When the Parliament or the monarchy met with opposition to their laws, their response was to send in troops to make sure that the colonists were kept under control. Of course, the colonists' problem was that the laws that were being imposed on them were not their laws. They weren't representative of what they needed or believed in. And they didn't have a voice, no one listened to them, and they couldn't get an ear. So basically their response was to do other things, like boycotts, Declaration of Independence. I would also like to point out real quickly that this particular image was propagated and used as propaganda by none other than Paul Revere, which helped with the Revolutionary War. Because of the disharmony of a lot of the colonists, the next step was to come up with what we call now the Declaration of Independence, and you'll see a copy of it here. And you can see down here a host of signatures, people that signed this. Sometime when you've got a little extra time, do yourself a favor and look up some of these names and read their biographies. This is a really interesting group, an eclectic group of people that came together and agreed on this document. That's a very powerful thing. But understand that the worldview that these people came to was inherited, and it was a worldview that was unequal. They inherited the notion of social hierarchy. They inherited the notion of institutions which actually propagated inequality. Well, if this is to work out, if they actually are going to produce a nation with equal rights for everyone, they're going to change that worldview forever. Let's roll the clock back to 1765. Understand that a lot of the colonists then were loyal to the crown, and they were happy with King George III, and they were proud to be Britons. Obviously, between then and 1776, things changed. First of all, they tried boycotts. We'll make our own products, thank you very much, England. Then the Declaration of Independence, we've got this, thank you, we'll rule ourselves. That eventually led to armed resistance. After a long and very hard-fought war, which is exhausting, and people were really tired of it when it was finally over. It occurred to the revolutionaries that they really needed a strong and stable central government in order to secure the blessings of liberty, as they put it. Okay? Well, how do you do that? Well, there's no real rule book on how to build a nation, so they were kind of making this up as they went along. But one of the things that they came up with was, first of all, we need a constitution. Once the constitution is ratified, there's still a few things we need to hammer out. So they had a constitutional convention in 1787. And that's when all the people came together, had great ideas, we're going to put them all on the table, we're going to talk about it, hammer out our decisions, and come up with good things. And they did. One of the things that we know as the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, came out of that meeting. And this particular flip book delves into some of the arguments and some of the debates that were going on at the time when this delegation was happening. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to the illustration here, which is not as fanciful as it looks. Understand that the delegates and representatives from these various colonies all had very passionate notions about what they wanted to get accomplished. So when it was their turn to speak, it was very intense, it was very passionate, and sometimes it actually spilled out onto the floor in violent acts of, shillelagh slinging. So this kind of thing actually did happen. It did get violent at times. Now, let's suppose that you were one of those representatives and you were there at the table and you were trying to decide what you wanted to do, keep in, keep out, what your priorities were. This computer right here will give you a chance to do that. Okay, let's assume that you're one of the delegates and you're going to this convention and you're going to vote on some of these propositions. Okay, here's one. It says the president should be elected and serve for life. Well, that's a great idea. I mean, George is doing a wonderful job. Let's keep him in there forever. No! It was not accepted. See? That's popular consent. I was voted down, and that's how democracy works. I would like to introduce you to the next part of this exhibit, which is called A Vote, a Voice. Thank you. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Elena, and I'm a teen volunteer here at the library. In this exhibit, we will be talking about voting rights. When the United States was founded, only a small fraction of the population could vote. In most states, only white males who are at least 21 and own property could vote. The nation's founders never foresaw the number of Americans of all classes, sexes, and races that now cast ballots each election day. This display shows the struggles different groups of people fought in persuading lawmakers, the courts, and their fellow citizens that they deserved the right to vote. Slowly, through a series of amendments and laws, these goals were reached. Starting in the 1850s, white men who did not own land could vote. This was followed by the 15th Amendment, which gave African American men the right to vote, and the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Sometimes funny, often rude and culturally insensitive, political cartoons used images and media to send a strong message, either for or against a certain cause. In this panel, there is a timeline of voting amendments and laws. Which ones affected you or your family? Take a moment to share your thoughts. This side focuses on what happened after these groups won the right to vote. Some advocates and officials encouraged people to come out to the polls and looked for ways to make voting easier. Others changed voter registration requirements and election day rules in attempts to minimize the political power of newly enfranchised groups. This voter enfranchisement and disenfranchisement is still going on today. States can pass laws that make it easier or harder to vote. This flipbook shows different examples of this. There are many groups that still have low voter turnout, so items like these are given out to motivate people to go out and vote. Why do you vote? Visitors to the exhibit dropped a coin in here to show it is most important to them. Where would you put your coin? I wish I could vote, but I'm under 18. You can share your answer in the comments. Now we can go on to the next part of the exhibit.
Hi, I'm Bud Garso, Library Specialist. This exhibit is all about how we vote. There is a lot involved in the election process that is not laid out in the Constitution. Some of these informal processes are state and national parties, nomination conventions, and campaigns. These are all part of the machinery of democracy to get people to go out and vote. Political parties began in the 1780s. Did you know that the elephant and the donkey that represent the Republican Democrat parties were created by a cartoonist? The term gerrymandering is explained in this cartoon. Election districts were redrawn by Governor Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts because he was afraid his party would lose power during the 1812 election. This tactic is still a contested issue. The first time campaigns used symbols in a presidential race was in 1840 for William Henry Harrison's campaign. He actually came from an affluent background and was raised on a plantation in Virginia. But the images of a rugged frontier life appealed to the new voters of the Western Territories. Can you think of imagery that is being used in presidential campaigns today? And is it accurate? This image at the bottom here is a timeline of parties, policies, persons, and events. You can see how parties evolve into each other or stop existing altogether. Campaign events have been going on since the 1800s. For Abraham Lincoln's campaign in 1860, his campaign organized torchlight parades where people of all ages carried torches like this one on nighttime marches. In the past few decades, campaigns have turned to television, radio, and the internet to promote candidates, but they still produce a lot of memorabilia, like these pins and posters you see here in the background. The Constitution gives states the responsibility of running elections, so every state is different. In our history, voters have used voice votes, paper ballots, punch cards, and computerized versions. Innovations in the voting process are supposed to make it easier, but they can also create new issues. This map shows the changes in the way people voted across the country in the 2000 and 2016 elections. The Electoral College was established by the framers as a way to balance the votes of northern states with southern states, where 1/3 of the population were enslaved people. That meant that the South would have less political power with a popular vote system. There have been a few occasions in our history where a president did not win the popular vote and won the election. Did you learn anything new about our voting process?
Hi, I'm Ruthie Hewitt, Lead Librarian of Adult Services. As we've seen throughout our history, there are many ways that people can address their issues and concerns. Let's talk about a few. A major concern of many Americans is equal representation. As you can see in this photograph, this protester is carrying a "Where is Democracy" sign to demand representation. Petitions are another way to make elected officials aware of your concerns. They can be paper or online. While petitioning has been open for everyone, it was especially important for those barred from voting. In the early republic, mass petitioning gave poor white men, women, free blacks, and other minorities a means to voice grievances and to claim a role in determining the direction of the country. Protests and marches, including signs, songs, speeches, and shouting, are all part of the American democratic process. They can be seen locally and in larger events in Washington, D.C. and other cities. This case shows examples of items worn during these protests. These posters are reproduction of protest posters, and they are now artifacts in the collection of the National Museum of American History. What causes do you see depicted here? And why do you think it's important to collect these? This sign was part of a March for Life protest from 1990. This one was in protest of the Vietnam War, and it took place after the Kent State shooting. And this sign was from a Black Lives Matter protest in 2013. Lobbying is another way groups can influence elected officials to support their cause. They can be representatives of grassroots movements, from corporations or organizations. They have their own material to draw attention to their cause. This case shows some examples of that. It's important to remember, as this panel says, where money and power meet, there is always the possibility that in this representative democracy, not everyone is listened to equally. Sometimes lobbying can turn into corruption. These images show examples of that. Some people believe that dishonesty is the exception, while others believe it is the norm. What do you think? You can share your thoughts on this using the hashtag #VoicesVotes. Now let's go to our next docent in the last section.
Hi, I'm Rosemary, Adult Services Librarian. In this part, we'll be talking about citizenship. So there's a few questions that we've been discussing and debating for generations, and those are: how diverse should the citizenry be? Do we need a common national story? What are the rights and responsibilities of citizens? And we're going to be talking about those today. Americans talk about being a nation of immigrants, but there's conflicting ideas of what that exactly means. So should we celebrate immigrants and the enrichment of our culture and values? There's also a concern that immigrants are going to change the character of the nation. And we see here, this is a family, and they're celebrating the American culture. You can see the flag and all the other embellishments. And this one is an image of a naturalization ceremony, and these immigrants are becoming U.S. citizens. So could you pass the citizenship test? These are actually questions, sample questions from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services test. So let's try out a few. We'll grab this one. Name one U.S. territory. And there's actually 14 territories and 2 that are disputed, so you have some pretty good odds. Okay, give you a second to think about it. So we've got Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Northern Mariana Islands, or Guam. Did you get any of those? Okay, let's try one more. How many justices are on the Supreme Court? Take a second to guess. 9. Bonus points if you can guess any of the names. So did you get those questions right? We'll move on to this side, which talks about traditions. So after the country got its independence from Britain, we started making traditions like holidays, Thanksgiving and 4th of July, emblems and symbols like the Founding Fathers, Uncle Sam, the flag, the red, white, and blue, and then we started making songs as well. This part right here lets us try out a few songs that we can listen to. So let's find one we like. So did you enjoy the song? Did it make you think of any memories or images while you were listening to it? We're going to move on to this part of the exhibit, which talks about the diversity of the citizenry. So there's a few different views. One is celebrating diversity. So this is multiculturalism, the preservation of diverse cultural heritages. You can see in this picture, there's a school teacher dressed as the Statue of Liberty, and then all her students are in the traditional clothes from their heritages. On this one here, it's a parade with the same thing going on, really. They're carrying flags of their heritages, and many of them are dressed in traditional clothes. And then down at the bottom, you can see that presidential campaigns try to reach these diverse groups to bring them into their campaign and get them to vote. So we've got all of these here from campaigns throughout the last few decades. So some of you may have heard this term, the melting pot, before. This is the next point of view on the diverse citizenry. So basically that means that immigrants get brought into the homogeneous American culture. So they do that by assimilation. There were programs that taught real American values to immigrants, and of course English to them as well. The last idea is that there shouldn't be any diversity at all in the citizenry. So it makes a nation only for some. So groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the Know Nothing Party, they believe these ideas. So the Know Nothing Party, they were around in about the 1850s and later, and they believed that immigrants and Catholics should not be a part of the country at all, especially not in political power. They were afraid of what that would do to the character of the nation. Also, there was a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment at that time. So Chinese immigrants, they were here, they were working, they were not allowed to be naturalized or become citizens. And there was a lot of racist acts against them. The last part that we see here talks about not even having a diversity of ideas. So this bumper sticker here says, "America, love it or leave it." So you either believe what this group wants you to believe, or you can get out. And that's what they believe. So you'll see some posters on this side from the artist Norman Rockwell, and they represent the freedoms, the rights of citizens. So he talks about freedom of speech, freedom from fear, freedom from want, and freedom of worship. So these came from a speech by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1941, where he stated these essential rights of citizens. I think it's also important to note that FDR was the president that sent Japanese Americans to the internment camps during World War II. So the rights that he stated weren't really for everybody. So these pictures represent some other rights of citizens. So right here you can see the right to an education, and this is a picture after the Supreme Court struck down segregation. There's also the right to bear arms, the Second Amendment of the Constitution. There's rights to work. There's rights for everyone, regardless of nationality of origin, race, sex, religion. These are just some examples of our rights that we have, but there's numerous more. There's also responsibilities of citizens, and you'll see some examples of that here. It's things like military service, which, when men turn 18, they have to register for the selective service and might be called up for a draft. There's paying taxes as a responsibility. There's the census, participating in that, which is going on right now, so make sure to contact your library if you need help filling it out. There's also the responsibility of just being a good citizen, participating in your community and in other civic duties. This panel here shows a timeline of amendments and laws relating to when different groups got the right to become citizens. So you'll see in 1776, the country, at that point the colonies declared independence, which finally led to becoming the United States of America. We talked about earlier a little bit the Chinese Exclusion Act, so that lasted from 1882 to 1943, and you'll see other groups on this timeline. So that concludes our tour. We hope you learned something new today and you have some ideas on what your rights and responsibilities are as citizens, and we hope you go out there and vote and become engaged as a citizen.
Thank you for watching this virtual tour of Voices and Votes, Democracy in America. We would like to invite you to participate by sharing your own voting story. Record your memories about voting, political participation, or your thoughts on civic responsibility through Be Here Stories. Find more information on this program by visiting our library website at prescottlibrary.info/voicesvotes. If you're interested in learning more about any of the content that you saw today, our website also has a book and movie list. Follow us on our social media channel for our next virtual tour of Voices and Votes Prescott exhibit that is in our viewery. Remember, you can share your feedback with us in the comments or use #VoicesVotes. We hope you enjoyed the tour and learned something new and inspiring today, and that as you look around the community, you will be able to see democracy in action.